What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm going to be bringing you a video response to my man, the Insane Game Freak, on a video that he put out a couple of days ago, I believe about 4 days ago, on old anime versus new anime. So as you can see, I got the glasses on because, you know, it's time to take you guys to school. Just a quick warning, if you haven't checked the time, I believe this video is going to be quite long because I'm going to be touching on at least 4 different topics. I'm going to be talking about the evolution of manga as a medium. I'm also going to be talking about the evolution of the shonen genre in particular. I'm going to be talking about the trends in the shonen genre, some of my likes and dislikes throughout the last 30 years, I would say. And then eventually I'm going to have to come down on the side of older anime versus newer anime. And let me just, tell you right quick, it has nothing to do with nostalgia. It's just my preference for, the themes and the concepts that were used in older anime versus the newer anime that have been put out in the last 10 years or so. So, first of all, we have to ask the question, when we're talking about, older anime versus newer anime, we obviously have to ask the question of what counts as an older manga or what counts as older anime. And I would say, if you take, a broader historical perspective, you would have to say that the older anime or the older manga goes back at least to the end of World War II. That's when, the older manga or the older anime begins. So between 1950, I would say, and 1980, and there's really 2 theories on the evolution of the manga as a narrative medium. The first is that manga is a natural evolution of certain artistic practices that date back in Japanese culture to the Meiji era, which I believe is around the 1870s, 1880s in Japan. The second theory on the evolution of the manga as a narrative medium is that during World War II, of course, if you know anything about history, I hope you at least know this much. World War II, the United States was obviously, against Japan. After we dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we, basically took over Japan, took over their government, dissolved their military, and the GIs who were stationed in Japan started bringing over comic books. And the idea is that American comic books eventually influenced the evolution and the origin of manga in Japan. And so to me, older manga dates back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and not the 80s, but definitely the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I would say that that period stops around 1980. So, when people automatically assume that, the older anime and manga classics date back to, the 1980s or the 1990s, it's obvious to me that their perspective is just limited by their age. And so some of the older classics that I would date back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s would be things like, Astro Boy, Cyborg 009, which had a remake in, I believe, 2001, but which dates back to the 1960s originally. Lone Wolf and Cub, Skullman, Doraemon, Galaxy Express 999, Lupin the Third. I know a lot of people know about Lupin the Third. I used to watch Lupin on Cartoon Network. Ashton no Joe, or Joe's Tomorrow, which is a boxing manga. Kikaider. I was in a Skype call, with the Cloud Village, and these guys hadn't never even heard of Kikaider. And I was just like, well, wow, you guys have never heard of Kikaider? Wow. Devilman, Mazinger Z, which is a super robot manga. Barefoot Gin, Blackjack, Space Pirate Captain Harlock. So those are some of the more influential or, classic manga, anime and manga that dates back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So, like I said, if you take a broader historical perspective on this issue of, what counts as older anime or manga, then you would have to say that the new anime and manga starts around 1980. And I would argue this for at least three reasons. Some of you who, have seen my Yu Yu Hakusho video on why Yu Yu Hakusho is so underrated, which was a video response to Darius 19R, you may have heard these arguments before. But I'll just repeat this very quickly, briefly, for those of you who haven't seen that video. Like I've said before, there was a transition in manga in the 1980s towards a subgenre of science fiction known as cyberpunk. So cyberpunk focuses on, dystopian societies. It takes a very grim look at the future. It's obsessed with the way technology is integrated into society and some of the negative consequences that could happen as a result of too much technological innovation. And it's also concerned with the themes of how corporations dominate society. And it's got, really, dark themes and undertones. So some of the cyberpunk manga that came up around the 80s and even in the early 1990s are, classics like, of course, Akira, Ghost in the Shell, although that came a little bit later, I believe in the early 1990s. Appleseed, Cyber City Oedo 808, Bubblegum Crisis, Genocyber, and Angel Cop. So the 1980s really marked a new direction for shonen manga insofar as the subgenre of cyberpunk really started to be developed. And there was a lot of, innovation within that subgenre of shonen manga. However, there was a transition starting with Dragon Ball and really picking up towards the end of the 1980s and really ramping up in the 1990s. There was this transition away from not just cyberpunk, but science fiction more generally and towards the fantasy genre. And Dragon Ball, was the origin of that transition. Although there is still, like in the late 80s and the early 1990s, there is some overlap between fantasy and science fiction, but I would say by about 1995, fantasy really, begins to dominate the shonen genre. So think of some manga that have, created that sort of transition towards fantasy. Dragon Ball, Saint Seiya, Berserk, Yu Yu Hakusho, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which, Uber Black Man is always talking about, and, Sailor Moon. And I think that trend has really continued to this day, because I looked on the top 10, sell rankings for the shonen genre, and I believe at least 7 out of 10 of those are in the fantasy genre. So I believe it's, Blue Exorcist, One Piece, Naruto, Fairy Tail, I believe is also in there, Toriko, and I think I'm missing a couple of others, but I believe it's 7 out of 10. Also, there was also another very important event in the evolution of the shonen genre that happens around 1980, and that is the splitting of the mecha genre into the super giant, robot genre, subgenre, and the what's called the real robot genre, which is, not those, big giant robots, but the smaller mechs like the Gundams or Full Metal Panic. Code Geass has them, not the big, giant robots, but, the smaller mechs that can be, piloted and controlled by humans or, just regular pilots. Also, Macross was like this, Escaflowne, Pat Labor, or Pat Labor, I don't really know how you pronounce it. But, those are the types of mecha anime and manga that were started and influenced by Yoshiyuki Tomino's Gundam series, which, again, split the mecha genre into the real robot subgenre and the supergiant robot genre. So, for those three reasons, again, the rise of cyberpunk, the transition from, science fiction more generally, and cyberpunk in particular, to fantasy, and also the splitting of the mecha genre into the giant robot subgenre and the real robot subgenre. Those are the three reasons why I think that you can probably date the coming of, the new, and I put that in quotes. You'll see why in a little bit, but those really mark a divergence from the older anime and manga that I previously mentioned, and those are the reasons why you can probably see that as a distinctly new period in the evolution of the shonen genre in manga. So, again, I have to ask the question, what do we mean by, older anime and manga? I'm not really sure, this is just, me personally ruminating about why this might be the case. I don't really know why people tend to disregard the older anime and manga from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I don't really know what people mean when they say the older anime and manga, but what they probably mean, and this is just my idea, because most people are below the age of 22, they probably mean older anime and manga. What they probably mean by older anime and manga is starting around 1980 and ending probably around 2001. So any manga or anime that sort of begins or especially ends before 2001, just because of, my age and, the sort of generational divide, I would say that the older anime and manga classics probably date from that period. At least the vast majority of people who are into anime and manga today are probably here because of things like Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball, Rurouni Kenshin, which are, for us, given the fact that we're only, 22 and below in terms of age, those are probably what we mean by the classic anime and manga. So those anime and manga consist of, Trigun, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which isn't really talked about that much, which is, sort of one of those mindfuck animes. Outlaw Star, definitely. Cowboy Bebop. Shaman King. Shaman King is a little questionable because I believe it begins in 1998 but ends in 2004. Sometimes it's treated as an older or classic anime and manga, so maybe that counts, maybe it doesn't. Big O, Fooly Cooly, S Cry Ed, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which no one talks about, but which is one of my favorite mangas. I believe that I'm not sure when that came out. I believe it was the 1980s. I believe it was 1980s, 82 specifically, I think. Rurouni Kenshin, of course, which I've done a review on. The Vision of Escaflowne, Blue Gender, which I'm watching right now for the second time. Baki the Grappler, Hajime no Ippo, and Monster by, I forget the guy's name, Naoki Urasawa, I believe his name is, which is, which Juno Diaz, who's won the Pulitzer Prize for The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, called a Japanese national treasure because of the intricacy of the plot and the storyline. And nobody mentions Monster, I'm not even sure if too many people have seen it, but Monster, which is a really classic manga, which is really good, which dates from the late 1990s. So those are the kind of anime and manga that I would consider to be the older, classics. And the newer, generation of anime and manga, I would say dates around, 2001. So the question, so now that I've, sort of, delved into this question of what constitutes the canon or what constitutes the classic anime and manga, let me just talk about briefly why I like the older anime and manga more than I like the new anime and manga. And first I have to talk about, of course, what makes a good manga. In order to be able to compare, to manga, I have to at least establish some standards of what I think makes a good anime and manga in general. So there's, really four things that I look for when I look for quality in not just anything pertaining to anime and manga, but just to narratives in general, although some things are specific to manga. First is the philosophy behind the story. So I'm looking for the kinds of themes and concepts that the author is working with. What kind of ideas are influencing the storyline of the manga that of the manga that they're writing. I'm looking for, of course, quality and story. Some of the things I'm looking for is, innovation, pacing, plot structure. So how the various plot points fit together and integrate together to create, a coherent narrative. I'm looking for, the relationship between the arcs, how they fit together. I'm looking for whether or not the story is plausible, whether or not the story is, coherent, whether it creates, a storyline that is, again, believable. And let me just briefly touch on something that a lot of people seem to be confused about. Story and plot are two very different things. Plot is how a story gets told. It's the details of the story. A story is basically just a narrative. So a story would be something like a woman hated her husband, so she killed him. That's a story. I mean, it's a very brief story. It's barely a story, but it is a story. The plot is how that happens. So, did she stab him? Did she shoot him? What were the decisions that led to her doing that? That's plot. That plot is how a story gets told. So when I say story, I mean, story, but also plot as well. Also characterization. So I'm looking for, the development of the characters, the growth of the characters, how they evolve from both a psychological and a moral standpoint. So I'm looking at how these characters evolve over time and how do the situations in which they find themselves or, the circumstances of the story, reflect or change who they become or influence their growth and development. And the last thing that I look for in a quality manga is the world building. So I'm looking for whether or not the rules of the world are consistent. And a very good example of this is the inconsistency in the Bleach storyline with the power levels being, all over the place. And I'm also looking for how the world that the mangaka has built adds to the story. So those are just the four things that I look for when I look for quality in an anime or a manga. So now let me just, talk about, why I like, older anime and manga versus the newer anime and manga. So first of all, there's, two revolutionary things that happen in the shonen genre around the 1980s and 1990s. And, I've talked about this before, but now let me go a little bit more into detail. Like I said before, Dragon Ball starts that shift away from science fiction. Well, not away from science fiction. There are still some science fiction anime and manga, but it really started the transition towards fantasy. So what happened was it expanded the boundaries of the shonen genre, and in particular, it did this by expanding the scope of fighting. Before Dragon Ball Z in particular, there was an action anime and manga, but Dragon Ball Z just took this to a whole nother level by introducing, and I've said this before, and Larry has said this, by turning the world or the universe of the manga into a sort of intergalactic battle royale. And so DBZ did a lot to pioneer new ground and new innovative ways to tell a story using the action format or formula. And again, the second thing that really revolutionizes the shonen genre is character development. And this happens with Yoshiyuki Tomino, who really does, actually maybe there's three things that revolutionize the shonen genre. But the second one is character development. And a very good example of this is Char Aznavour from the Gundam series, which is just some amazing character development. Char Aznavour starts off as a villain. He starts off as an antagonist, who is, we think, might be a villain, but then who we find out is not really a villain, but he is someone who's like the sort of revenge, not revenge antagonist, which is very interesting. A dimension of his personality is that he wants to take revenge on somebody, but it's not against the protagonist of the series, which is, Amuro Ray and, the United Earth Federation. Not those guys, but against the people who he's fighting with. Then in Zeta Gundam, he becomes the protagonist of that series. And so we actually see his moral evolution, that he's, not, fighting on behalf of the bad guys, but it actually looks like now he's going to be, a good guy. And then in Char's counterattack, he goes through another another phase of character development or character evolution, where now again he's the antagonist of the series, and it turns out that he has now become a full-fledged villain. That type of, characterization was just revolutionary for its time. And also, the characterization that happens in Yu Yu Hakusho and Rurouni Kenshin, which follows that. But also another, the third revolutionary thing that happens in the shonen genre, which I really, liked. Of course, I liked, the expanded boundaries of action, and also, how characterization developed within the shonen genre. But I also like the introduction of darker themes. And again, you have to look to Yoshiyuki Tomino for setting this trend, because he really did it. It's not really known, but the original Gundam series was canceled, which is why it has that odd number of episodes, 43. But in the meantime, between the original Gundam series and Zeta Gundam, Yoshiyuki Tomino worked on an anime series called Space Runaway Ideon, which I know a lot of you people are familiar with, and which is my favorite anime, although it's not, yeah, it is my favorite anime. I don't think it was ever turned into a manga, but it is my favorite anime, and basically, it gets really dark really fast. And eventually, I don't want to spoil anything for those of you who want to watch it, but it gets ridiculously dark. Now, everybody knows about Zeta Gundam and how dark, Zeta Gundam is, and, that's how he got his name, Kill 'Em All Tomino, because, he likes to, kill off his characters. But what really set that stage was Space Runaway Ideon. It wasn't Zeta Gundam. It was Space Runaway Ideon, which really allowed mangakas to see that it was possible to innovate storylines that dealt with darker themes, like genocide and like, discrimination and like, extreme forms of violence, and about, how one culture tries to dominate another culture and what the consequences of that would be. So those are the three revolutionary things that I really loved about the older anime and manga classics in the shonen genre. And this sort of trend really gets picked up and developed by Yoshihiro Togashi, the mangaka of both Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter. Yes, I say Hunter x Hunter. I don't say Hunter x Hunter. Hunter x Hunter. And one of the things that Togashi Yoshihiro did was he kept the action format of DBZ, but he added characterization. And a great example of this is in the Saga of the Three Kings, which is a pretty good arc, and one of the best arcs in all of, shonen manga. And I know there's some problems with that arc. Yes, it's kind of flawed because, the action may not be that great. And it is, rather redundant because it is, the third tournament in that series. But the character development was absolutely flawless. And I have to give a big shout out for Hawk Goggles, who's just developed a new channel within the last, couple of months. So check out my boy Hawk Goggles' review of Yu Yu Hakusho, which was, absolutely, spot on and awesome. And I think I'll link his channel in the description box below. The characterization in that Saga of the Three Kings arc and Yu Yu Hakusho was perfect. flawless characterization. And I say characterization rather than character development, because characterization encompasses more than just character development. It encompasses character development, but it's also about the relationship between characters, which is something quite distinct from just character development and character growth. So there's 4 levels of characterization in that one arc. And a lot of people, skip over this, or, they don't realize it, but there's actually 4 levels of characterization in that arc. The first level of characterization is just at the individual level of characters. So the character development of, Yusuke, who's trying to figure out who he is and trying to develop his relationship with other people and just trying to develop his own identity. And you see this with respect to him wanting to go to Demon World in order to learn about Ryzen, who is his ancestral father. Also, you get the backstory of Yoko Karama, and you get to see his character development. And you also get to see the character development, the individual growth, and the sort of psychological and even moral evolution of Hiei. The second level of characterization is about how there's this undertone, even though they're on 3 different sides. There's this undertone of the relationship, or the development of the relationship between Yusuke, Hiei, and Yoko Karama. That's the second level of characterization. The third level of characterization is in the Saga of the Three Kings. I'm going to spoil it a little bit, but these guys are in 3 different factions, all fighting against each other. So Yusuke has teamed up with Aizen, Hiei has teamed up with Makoro, and Yoko Karama has teamed up with Yomi. So you get to see the characterization and the character development through the relationship between these 3 factions. And the 4th level of characterization is about how each one of these factions has, how each one of these relationships between Yusuke and Ryzen, Hiei and Makoro, and Yoko Karama and Yomi develop just between, each set of 2. So those are just 4 levels of characterization. On the individual level, on the relationship between Yusuke, Hiei, and Karama, on the level of, those characters' relationship to their faction, which would be Yusuke and Ryzen, Hiei and Makoro, and Yoko Karama and Yomi, and then the relationship between those 3 factions. A lot of credit. A lot of times you hear the Saga of the Three Kings being downplayed because, it was redundant and the action wasn't, that great, and, Kuwabara eventually gets dropped. Although we can sort of understand why that's the case, given the fact that this is about Demon World and Kuwabara is not a demon. But what you have to give your props to and you have to show respect for is the amount of characterization that went into that arc by Togashi Yoshihiro, which was just, absolutely amazing. And then this, trend towards more sophisticated characterization really picks up with Rurouni Kenshin, which sort of takes that template that Yoshihiro Togashi uses in the Saga of the Three Kings and applies it to an entire series. And for those of you who haven't seen my review of Rurouni Kenshin, you can go and check that out, and where I talk about how the characterization of the prowess of Watsuki Nobuhiro's characterization in Rurouni Kenshin is just absolutely godlike. I mean, this man is just, on another level when it comes to characterization. Now, compare that trend, which was alive and kicking in the shonen genre at least in 2001. Compare that to some of the series we get now. Naruto. I mean, when it comes to characterization, Naruto is just very, very sad. I mean, it's very, very sad. You get static characters. You get inconsistency in characters. I mean, and I've already talked about this with Sasuke and the plot trap and the inconsistencies in his character. And a lot of people have already remarked on, how static Naruto's character is in terms of how he's obsessed with bonds and he wants to go after Sasuke. But just look at the inconsistency in other characters of that series. Think about the fight between Chiyo and Sakura and Sasori. Why is it that we're able to accept that Sasori, who's a member of the Akatsuki, all of a sudden at the end of that fight allows himself to be killed? Because if you remember, Chiyo said, he could have avoided that last attack, but it looks like he hesitated. Why are we willing to accept that sort of inconsistency in characterization? Why are we willing to accept inconsistency in characterization when it comes to people like Pain? A man who has built his entire life on this ideology of pain, and then all of a sudden Naruto shows up, beats him up, and all of a sudden he just has this pre-death conversion? Are we really supposed to believe that? Why do we accept that sort of inconsistency in characterization? And not only besides the inconsistency in characterization, but look at somebody like Tintin, who gets absolutely no freaking character development. Like, what is Tintin's last name? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, she doesn't even have a last name. I mean, this is just so sad, Kishimoto. Just so sad. Just so sad. Also, think about something like, Claymore. Which, a lot of people have mentioned, but it doesn't seem to be very popular. Claymore is a prime example of this shift towards more action in the shonen genre. In action at the cost of story development and characterization, because it seems like every volume you get a new villain, and by the time we get to a point of story development, the plot just becomes extremely messy in the second after the time skip. The plot gets ridiculously messy after the time skip. He's trying to introduce too many ideas and concepts in order to develop the story of Claymore, and too many ideas just clash and get jumbled together. Also think about a new manga like, Gantz. It has an amazing concept and framework. A lot of people would say Gantz is, just violence for the sake of violence. I really don't think that's true. I think the concepts, the philosophical underpinnings of that manga are just, absolutely spot on and excellent. Gantz is a manga that deals with nihilism. Nihilism is a philosophy which says that there is no meaning to the universe, that there is no ultimate purpose to the universe, and that human beings have to find their own purpose. There is no objective purpose to the universe. And it also deals with themes of misanthropy. Misanthropy is the philosophy that, human beings are basically worthless, that, it's basically about hatred towards, human beings in general. And Gantz is a very interesting manga, very weird flavor to it, because it asks us to consider the possibility that there are no objective standards of morality. And then it asks us, what are the possibilities for the redemption of humanity and the redemption of the human spirit within a context that denies the existence of objective moral standards, which is why the violence aspect of Gantz is so important, because it asks us to consider human nature in relation to violence, and it sort of plays with the idea of poetic justice by showing what happens when human beings are treated the way we treat other life forms on this planet, like animals, and even the way we treat other human beings. So that's what Gantz is basically about. But again, if you look at the characters, they're just wholly unbelievable. Like, these characters are not plausible at all. I just can't believe that there are other human beings. I mean, this is a very rare case that human beings are so, morally just devoid of moral standards. I mean, it's just totally unbelievable characters. So to me, I think that the shonen genre has evolved, not in a good way, because it's become stale. There's more emphasis on action rather than story and character development. And what really irks me is that these mangakas keep trying to pay homage to past anime and manga, but in the wrong way. So basically, what happens is it stifles innovation. If you try and use that same, Dragon Ball Z action format, it's just eventually, and this is something that Larry touched on in another video, eventually, you just lose your anime aesthetic because you'll start to see the same stories over and over and over again. And this is what happens with One Piece, Bleach, Naruto, to a certain extent, Hunter x Hunter, Toriko, Fairy Tail, Hitman Reborn. I mean, they're just bland, it seems to me. Because they have the same action format, and after a while it just becomes, very, very stale. Another problem that I have with the shonen genre as it has evolved is that we're living in the age of what I would call the super manga. For some reason, mangakas have got it in their head that there needs to be, in order to have a great story, you need mangas that have volumes that are 30, 40, 50 volumes long. It's ridiculous. I mean, Yu Yu Hakusho is a great manga and it's only 19 volumes. Rurouni Kenshin is an excellent manga. Maybe the best manga ever, in my mind, is only 28 volumes. And, it's just really sad. Because this really creates all sorts of problems for the genre. If you have a super manga, it'll be more epic. And you have to do a lot of work in terms of world building. But, what comes along with world building is that you have to populate that world. So you have a lot of characters. But if you have too many characters, then it's harder to give each character the attention that they deserve. And the best example of this is One Piece, where it, it copies that DBZ format, where it's, basically the Monster of the Week format, where they have to go to every island that they go to has a problem, has a villain that has to be defeated by the Straw Hat crew. And you eventually have to wind up learning the backstory of every single island. And it just totally messes up the pacing of the story, which is something that the Fist of Soy Sauce mentioned in his video on One Piece. And so you get weird situations where Luffy is basically the same character for 50 volumes. He basically doesn't get any character development until 50 plus volumes into the manga. So you can either take the One Piece path where you have to, get the backstory of every single island that the Straw Hats visit, which messes up the pacing of the story and messes up the character development of the protagonist, or you get something like Naruto, which, instead of trying to address the character development, he just totally, dismisses certain characters. I do think that there are some good aspects to, the super manga. One of the best aspects of the super manga is the world building. So let me just say this. One Piece has the best world I've ever seen in a manga. The world building is godlike status. The concepts that he uses, hockey and devil fruits and the world government and the Shichibukai, the supernovas, the four Yonko, the culture that he's created, these ancient civilizations, the mythology of the One Piece world is absolutely brilliant. But the story and the characterization to me is just, lagging a little bit. Like I said, I read the first 50 volumes of One Piece, and when I finished, I didn't feel it was anything special. I thought it was just, it was good. It was decent. It was solid. It was, it was average. So, this is the reason why I think the quality of, the newer anime and manga has just gone down because, when the stories get more epic, it's worse for characterization in general. At least I find this to be the case, from a personal standpoint. The storytelling just, it goes down a little bit. The quality of the storytelling goes down. And also, one of the things that I really don't like about the newer shonen, anime and manga is that, and I'm saying, I'm talking about the shonen anime and manga, the newer anime and shonen manga in general. But there are some exceptions, like Code Geass or 666 Satan, which is my favorite manga. Full Metal Alchemist, which is which will go down as definitely a classic. So this isn't for everything, but this is what I find to be the case generally of newer shonen anime and manga. Um, so the standard of the stories have just gone down. To me, the best stuff that the shonen genre produces is not kid friendly, and yet all the stories that we keep seeing is to me silly stuff like Toriko. Like, I just don't care about a story about someone who wants to create the best meal. I don't honestly, I don't give a fuck. I don't care about uh a kid who wants to become Hokage. Okay, it's a nice story, but it may be enjoyable, but the standard of storytelling has just gone down. Like, seriously, a kid wants to become Hokage, big deal. The Straw Hat Pirates, they want to find One Piece, big fucking deal. I don't want to read stories about treasure hunting. The best stuff that the shonen genre has ever produced tends to be things with darker themes that deal with more mature content, like Zeta Gundam, like the Chapter Black saga in Yu Yu Hakusho, like the Kyoto arc in Rurouni Kenshin. Those things that deal with more mature content matter, because it forces your audience to become more mature, and it raises the standard of writing, and it raises the expectation of readers. And it seems like the trend now for shonen for the shonen genre is to produce stories that are more action and adventure oriented, and that keep reproducing the same stories over and over and over again. Toriko, Hitman Reborn, One Piece, Naruto, those are like, action adventure stories, just reproduced ad nauseum, just over and over and over again. And to me, when I say I value or I like the older anime and manga more than I like the newer anime and manga, it has nothing to do with nostalgia. Because although I did watch Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball when I was young, probably around 7 years old, um, I really had no idea what anime and manga was until I was 18 years old. So I've only been watching and reading anime and manga for, just over the last, like, maybe 4.5 years. So, this has nothing to do with nostalgia. It has to do with the trend in recent shonen anime and manga towards more action-adventure oriented stories at the cost of characterization and story development, and away from, darker themes and more mature content matter. That's basically the reason why I prefer the older anime and manga as opposed to, the newer anime and manga. So yeah, this is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace, and have a blessed day.